Hello. Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello, welcome to Denver Startup Week and the Product Track Keynote. How is everybody's fourth quarter planning going? There are like 7 business days left. Remember, KPIs are like jokes. If you have to explain them, they're not good. How many product managers are out there? How many aspiring product managers are out there? Nice, 3. How many general back of the house product people are there? Engineers, designers, UX? Nice, thank you. Let me introduce myself. My name's Aaron. I'm a product manager. I'm on the leadership team for Colorado Product, which is the de facto product professional organization here in the Front Range. Please check out coloradoproduct.com, join the Slack community and the meetup. We have some really talented folks here on the panel. I'll start here. Scott, you're first. Scott is a product advisor now. Probably everybody in the room knows Scott. He's helping B2B SaaS companies scale their products. He was at GitLab forever. He was at SendGrid, Twilio, for years, and he was there when they were acquired by Twilio. Thank you for being here. Next is Kelly. Kelly leads the language applications product teams at Google Labs. It's her second stint at Google. She took a little break and was at Stripe for a while there. She also, were you in South Africa? Yes.
Yes, long time ago now.
And she lives in Boulder now. Katie. My sisters are Kelly and Katie. Very interesting. Katie Holden is the VP of Product at Workday. Probably everybody here knows Katie as well. She's overseeing the Core Experience Technology Group. It's a global organization, about 300 people. She's got some massive experience working with extremely high-growth startup environments. She's been a part of a couple IPOs herself. Lastly, Chandler. Chandler is a company builder, technologist, angel investor, and he also has a day job at Guild. Prior to Guild, he worked in a couple local darling environments like Craftsy, Pay Group, and TripAdvisor. I think there were 2 IPOs and an acquisition there. Very nicely done. So we have a serious group of panelists here. Thank you. I'm talking a lot. I'm sorry about that. Thank you to Amazon. And thank you to Final Find, the Product Track sponsor. A little bit of housekeeping. I have a couple questions that we're going to talk through here today, and then I'd love to open it up to some Q&A from the audience in case anybody has any burning questions they would like to ask the panelists. There is a small happy hour somewhere around here after the event. I'm not quite sure where it is. It's over there. In that room over there will be a little happy hour for everyone. So let's cut to the chase. So I am a product manager. I have about 20 years of experience. I worked at Sony for a while. It was back when Sony was not doing very great things. I was a global product manager of the quote-unquote PlayStation phone. It was basically It was a really big hit. We have mics. It was not a really big hit. That's kind of what I'm getting at. And I'd like... At one point, it had a very large business case, but ultimately it totally fizzled. And I'm wondering, Chandler, and let's start with you since you're picking on me. What are some of your most impressive product failures that you can think of, and what have you learned?
It's a long and distinguished list. I'm actually going to go back to a place where we had a success and then a failure at the next spot. So when I was at TripAdvisor in the early days of mobile, there were big questions around how do you get distribution in a native environment. There was also some interesting questions around how do you build offline functionality. As you think about travel, this was back before T-Mobile and Verizon and company had global plans that allowed you to roam wherever for free, essentially. And so we bought a couple companies and built these little offline native apps. We called them city guides. They very much replicated the book experience in lots of ways and allowed you to pre-download kind of what your experience looked like when you were going to Barcelona. It was a pretty cool concept and gave us lots of distribution. It meant we went from 1 to about 40 apps in the App Store, got a ton of traction because it turned out people go looking for attractions and restaurants and all the things that you do in the late stages. And then from there, we were able to acquire users and transition them to the core app, which is where we made all our money. When I came to Craftsy, we tried to do the same damn thing, and it was a total failure. So at Craftsy, we had a bunch of categories. So it was an app that served knitters, quilters, cake decorators, other enthusiasts. And the idea was, hey, they're searching for things in those spaces. Quilters want to learn things about quilting. Let's go win in quilting, almost like you would with landing pages in SEO world. So we built all these pattern apps and distributed them and got no traction, no converted users, really nothing to speak of. And I think it was an interesting example for me of the plays you use in one space and one environment and one moment, right? When we were doing it at TripAdvisor, it was like the first year of app stores. And then as that space matured, as we had a different user, all those sorts of places, we just fell flat on our face. So it was actually my first marquee initiative after I joined Craftsy, and I probably should have been fired over it, but luckily Josh and John and the founders were very willing to listen to why we did it, and we're on board with that, and then we kind of came out from there.
Yeah, I think you don't get your stripes unless you have a few epic fails under your belt. You know, we all want to fail small, but I think all of us have shipped something pretty big before. I had one earlier in my career. It was a company called Boku. So it was a mobile payments company. And actually, the company was pretty cool. The idea was, how could you turn your mobile phone into a payment instrument, like a credit card? But it was largely for a global market, right? Where credit card penetration is not common, but everyone has a phone bill. Right? They top it up, they add minutes, they go to a pay station. So it's like, they already have a payment instrument. Let's just make it for stuff more than just your mobile phone. Okay, well, enter visionary founder type. Anyone worked for one of those? He's got a great idea. A great idea, tap and pay, an NFC phone, tap and pay. This was before it was common where you could all tap and pay, right? That's about a decade ago. And we're going to distribute it through the carriers. It's like AT&T and T-Mobile are going to give you a credit card instrument, and you'll put a sticker on your phone. We're off to the races. You know, I was pretty excited about it, if I'm being honest. Those visionary types can get really good at spinning up stuff that sounds really like, yeah, we're totally going to do that. And like, we built a wallet. We built a merchant portal with coupons. We built 3 Scrum teams worth of 2 years of product. And I would love to be like, not me, product manager. I was like, hold on. Let's validate this. But I was kind of caught up in the moment, right? And caught up in the visionary founder. So 2 big lessons from this. When I was trying to finally start figure out this thing is failing, how do I go up against this visionary founder type? There was a more senior product leader in my org at this point, and he said the best story wins. So you're not going to beat him on vision, beat him on facts. So we just started talking to people, and they were like, pulling out a credit card is not hard. It works every single time. Pull out, boop, boop, boop. You don't even have to sign anymore. They've taken the friction out of it. Why is pulling out a credit card versus pulling out a phone any better for the consumer? Right? And even just that fundamental insight, once you start to think about it, we did user research, you're like, yeah, we're just going to force this on consumers? No freaking way. So I think for me, what I took from that is when I'm trying to be compelling now as a product manager and now as a product leader, I try and build like the arsenal case of facts. And I'm like, you want to debate me? Let's do it. Where's your facts, you know? And I use that for the visionary types, and I use that for the operators, and I use that for every leader I've worked with. It's very hard to debate an arsenal of facts. So, you know, hopefully failing a little less nowadays, but still failing from time to time.
Fantastic. I love facts. There's no doubt that big tech has seen a round of layoffs, a couple rounds of layoffs. There's no doubt that Denver itself has seen quite a few layoffs. Actually, to the audience, why don't you give me a big boo if you've been laid off? How about an applause if you've been hired in the last 2 years? Katie, I'm going to come back to you, but as a hiring manager, other than some of the obvious things that you can do, how would you recommend that product managers differentiate themselves in this market?
Yeah, I want to start by saying I think there's a lot of properly good talent on the market right now. So if you're in this room and looking, as someone who's got a large team now and has a lot of hiring, I know there's awesome people out there. And the challenge is there's way too many folks for the number of jobs we have open. So please don't take it personal as you're getting through all those no's. It just sucks. But we've got a lopsided equation right now if you're looking. It is obvious, I think, to try and use your network and get referrals. But I think it's pretty hard for people early in career who might not have a network yet. So for that, I would say don't only think about your professional networks, think about your friends, think about your personal networks, think about your school alumni networks, right? Try and get really creative about trying to find that intro. And then my second piece of advice is be incredibly tailored and amped about the specific job you're going after. Right? And this might be hard because you're going to try and apply to 15 jobs. But, when I see people come in the door, and we get a lot of people knocking on the door at Workday now, and they've done their homework, said, oh, I saw Workday just announced this. They even do this in cold LinkedIn messages, right? I recently saw Workday did this. I saw this specific job open with this specific number, no work for me, right? Put it all in there at the link. And by the way, I'm really passionate about blah from my experience, and just pick one quick story, right? I'm incredibly passionate about mobile because, I've been building those for the last 3 jobs, or just anything to personalize it and show enthusiasm. Certainly won't solve all the problems, but I think just doing that basic step might take you from 95% never hear back rate to at least 50% might write you back and say, hey, thank you for your interest because you took the time. So that would be my key piece of advice, and just do acknowledge it's a hard market. Only other thing I'd say is you can't be super picky, and right, that's just a reality. People know that. But the one thing I would be picky about is make sure you go somewhere that you can ship, right? You might have to flex on the market you want to be in. You might have to flex a little bit on the title. Don't compromise on going to a role that you can ship, because that way if you land somewhere bad, and it's a hard market and you're not going to have choices, but you're shipping, you can tell a great story on your way out of that company and land your next role. But if you land in a bad company where you can't ship, now you're in a tough spot, because that's going to be your most recent experience. So I'd say be flexible on everything, but stay true to shipping. That's the bread and butter for PM.
One thing I want to do is combine actually 2 of the things you said. So Katie mentioned be really specific when you're going to the company with what you want, and be tailored, and also mentioned reaching out to professional and personal folks. And I want to combine those 2 into when you reach out to those people, be really specific about what you want, because you'll have almost everyone who's very willing to help, but they may not actually know how to help you. Someone who is not a product manager, who you say, I'm looking for a product management job. They don't really even know what that means necessarily, but if you talk about the type of company you're interested in, they might say, oh yeah, I know someone in marketing at such company, and then you kind of follow the breadcrumbs. So I would just think a lot about that, of what is your very specific pitch. The other thing, and this is a lot easier said than done, is go to the growth areas as much as you can in this type of environment. So, a startup that raised money 4 weeks ago is probably a lot more likely to be hiring than a startup that raised money a year ago. And I don't mean that as a hard and fast rule or something, but just thinking about, hey, if you are going to be a little bit more flexible on exactly what you want, really think about what types of functions are still hiring in this market, or which type of industries, what types of startups are going to have an easier time raising money or a harder time raising money.
I promised you guys no zingers, but I was just thinking about this. What about the MBA? I think, Scott, you have an MBA. Kelly, you have an MBA. Katie, you don't. Chandler, you don't. What do you think about the value or the importance in the 2020s, now, the current times? Do you think that an MBA could help you stand out as a product manager?
Yes, it can. If I reflect on my own time, I ended up getting an MBA in 2001 to 2003. It was a down market, and it was actually a decent time to be going through an MBA program. And I did it with the intention of pivoting over to product management. So if you have intentionality for what you want out of it, then it can be a great experience and can differentiate you from someone who doesn't have one, depending on the role. Some roles are super technical, it matters less. Some roles are very tied to business outcomes, and it can matter a lot.
Yeah, my MBA is from a while ago, but I think if the sole goal is like, what is something I can do for 2 years that makes me the best product manager in the whole world, I probably wouldn't say an MBA is the very top of the list. If the goal is, how do I get like help turn into a well-rounded GM who maybe has a product background or wants to start with product and then run a business, then it can be really helpful. I've found that a lot of the value I've gotten has actually come later from the MBA. Meaning, like at Stripe, I had P&L responsibility, and there I was really glad that I had an MBA instead of only product experience. So that can be helpful. I also think there's a lot of intangibles associated with an MBA that maybe don't like get you exactly a certain job, but for example, give you an amazing global network or help you get to know people across tons of different industries. And so I think if you want to have kind of a more creative latticed career, MBAs can be really helpful because you can jump industries, in my experience, more easily. As an example, I met my husband getting an MBA, another bonus, unexpected. That was not my intention going in. But when he came, he was an MD MBA, so he's also getting a medical degree, then realized he didn't want to be a doctor. But that helped him get into first healthcare AI, and now he has his own tech startup, which is not what he was on the path to do. So I think and you talked about kind of switching into a new role from that, I think that can be where the value is. But I would not say like, hey, just go get an MBA, next door because it's hard to find a job right now, unless you do have that intentionality, or else you will have a lot of debt to pay for a very long time.
So I actually have some pretty spicy personal opinions on this, but instead of going that direction, I'm going to share a little bit on the global job market since we just came out of talking about jobs. At my current business, we work with Fortune 1000s to figure out what their talent pipelines look over time and how they grow their talent. A question we get asked every day is, should I be paying for my employees to go get an MBA? I think a couple observations I would have and these are the largest businesses in the world, so I think not startups, and so I would take that for what it is. A couple observations I would have. Skills-based hiring is incredibly important in the current market, and so understanding how your current skills articulate into what they are hiring for is critical. I think in doing that, a lot of the MBA programs are doing a great job with resume construction right now in a skills-based structure because they know what hiring looks like. And so there's probably some interesting value sitting there in just like they're better at articulating what it means to get hired and how you figure out at getting the next job. All that said, the next thing that employers are asking us is, instead of paying 120 grand for these people to get their MBAs, how do I unpack that and make it not that? And so we're spending a lot of time teaching the corporate world right now how to take the content components of an MBA, which doesn't account for the network and doesn't account for some of the experiences. So let's call those intangible value that we're not going to go into right now, and breaking it down to a couple different certificate programs. And so if you're interested in becoming a GM, another path is to go take a finance certificate and to go take an HR certificate and a few other things over time as they're relevant to your career and kind of build them in. I think you'll also find many employers are glad to sponsor that as you're doing it. And so instead of taking on the debt, another path that we're seeing a lot in the market is people taking the content over time at a much lower cost built into where they are in their career.
I love that suggestion. The thing I would add to that is, because the network doesn't come out of like that specific thing, I would be really, if you're not going to get an MBA, kind of regardless, would be really intentional about how you build that network to kind of think about that over time. And that can be like basic things, like inviting all the cool product people to have dinner at a restaurant together or something like that. There are a lot of ways to build a network. And that seems even more important right now.
So one, to build on that, one thing that is interesting, let's say you're willing to spend 2 years and $100,000 growing your career, which is actually a cheap version of an MBA, right? But let's call it 2 years and $100,000. If you had those two things, how would you spend it to grow your career? Break them down, like take it down to first principles. I would build a great network, and here's the 3 ways I would do that. I would learn a bunch of content. Here's the 3 things I would do there. I would spend X number of time on trial interviews and internships and those sorts of things. Here's a couple ways I'd do that. So I think there's ways to break it down and do it your own way that end up getting you to a similar spot. All that said, it is impossible. The MBA question is one of my favorites out there because it's so hard to null test. because someone either has an MBA or doesn't, and you can't go backwards and change their career or change their current place. And so I think it's such an interesting one for people to find their own path on.
Thank you. Yeah. Y Combinator founder Paul Graham described product market fit as when you've made something that people want. Sam Altman characterized it as when users spontaneously tell other people to use your product. And the most cited description is obviously from Andreessen's 2007 blog post. You can always feel when product market fit is not happening. The customers aren't getting getting value out of the product. Word of mouth isn't spreading. Usage isn't growing that fast, and press reviews are kind of blah. The sales cycle takes too long, and lots of deals never close. Scott, you've had multiple journeys to finding product market fit. Can you share any successes or mistakes or pitfalls that you've seen?
Yeah, right now I'm a product advisor. I've probably worked with 30 different companies since I left GitLab last year, and I'm seeing a lot of patterns from that, as about 60% of them are seed through A. And I think the most common pattern is a lack of willingness to focus on a particular ideal customer profile. I think that underpins everything else that happens in a startup. A lot of startups are reluctant to bet on one because it's scary. You're basically saying no to a set of opportunities that might look good in any one customer meeting. But if you spread yourself too thin with very thin resources, you end up with no product market fit. So my advice to people I'm working with is, find the segment with the most potential and allow yourself to focus and double down, because you're going to have to be 10 times better than anybody else to get anyone's attention to try your thing. And you only get that by deep focus, and that seems to be a difficult leap for many founders to make.
One other thing to build on that is, so the organization that I work with in Google is called Labs, and it's focused on building new products, mostly AI-powered for Google. And one of the kind of ethos we have is around co-creation with users. And that's something I think a lot about in terms of product market fit. It's especially helpful for AI stuff because there are a lot of use cases that we haven't really explored, and you can't necessarily predict user behavior in the same way that you would maybe for a more traditional product. But we try to think about, like, hey, how do we actually get this out there, sit with people, and get their advice? Like, get the feature list from your users based on what they complain about. Like that should be a major input. And so just one example, we've got an experimental product called Notebook LM that one of my teams built, and it's basically a way to digest massive amounts of information. So imagine you're a student that has let's say you're cramming for a last-minute exam, and you may or may not have read all of your papers, or you just want a refresher. You can kind of Q&A with that to help you prepare for a test. And so we go out and literally physically go to universities and sit with students and also with teachers to understand how do you help people absorb information better. And so that's something certainly on my mind for PMF. I'll also give you one of the cringy opposites because some of the things you were saying about when it's not working out, really hit home. One of the things that I've noticed with teams is every once in a while you'll have a product that sounds really good that everyone's working on, and they are legitimately working really hard on it. And then you'll find out somehow that, hey, it turns out that actually half the team has never actually used this product as a user. They're building stuff for it, they're interviewing people about it, but oh, do you have this thing installed yourself? Did you use this last week? And there's always that sheepish feeling. And frankly, I bet all of us have at certain times been that way about a feature we're working on or a new product. And to me, that's a big sign. It obviously varies a lot by industry, right? So there are some things that are a lot easier to use as a user than others if you're not, that personal user yourself. But that to me is a really big sign. How much are you using your product yourself?
I think we can all agree that generative AI is posed to transform most roles inside of a tech startup. Certainly product management, customer support, software development, copywriting, everything will be affected. I'm going to come back to you, Kelly. What applications of generative AI are you seeing at Google, and what excites you the most?
Yeah, so can't speak for all of Google, but I can mention some things that certainly within our team we're using it for, and then I'll also zoom out a little bit and talk about some of the things that we're working on just to share like where I think there's a lot of potential. So the biggest thing that I'm seeing is that people are using AI as a thought partner, which is not necessarily what I originally thought people would use AI for. I thought, oh, just get things done faster or do it for me. And instead, there's a lot of this like sparking debate and new questions and things like that. Just as an example, I recently went to London for work, and I took a ton of notes on all the people that I met with. And I wanted to write like a trip report to send to my team so they knew, oh, who'd you meet with, what'd you learn about, things like that. And these can be fairly dry trip reports in certain cases, and I want to make mine fun. So I asked Bard, which is one of Google's generative AI tools, to help me come up with a funny or punny name for each of my paragraphs about some of the takeaways. And some of them were great suggestions, and I just copied them over and plopped them in. Other ones, were not as good, or made me think about, like, okay, well, that's not actually that funny, but that gives me a really good idea for something else. And so I've seen people do that a lot. I've even seen it with kind of digesting some of these big documents that we've talked about before for this product notebook LM of like, hey, I just saw a new research paper on a new way of LoRa tuning, which is like a way to improve your model, but I don't actually want to read 76 pages. Let me Q&A with that. So we're seeing a lot of use cases like that. One other thing that I'm personally really excited about, partly because I work on it, but partly because I think it's going to be huge for folks in the room who are engineers or who want to build things but are not engineers, is a lot of the AI coding applications. It's truly amazing to see how we went from just being able to like finish a phrase of your code to actually starting to generate entire UI blocks and other things. I think right now probably still feels a little bit intimidating for folks who don't have at least some familiarity with coding, but I imagine that's going to really evolve. And I think everyone here should be really excited about that, because folks will be able to build things much faster, build things without quite as much technical debt, do fun things like run bug fixing overnight and just check it in the morning. So excited about those.
I want to build on both of those actually, and then I'll come if you want to go. So I don't know if anyone's seen the recent Intercom team just put out a new podcast talking about essentially AI as part of product strategy. Highly recommend. Came out, I think, this morning. They talked about an interesting thing on the coding side, but they actually talked about it in terms of all creative functions. In the past, they were talking a lot about like the value of Midjourney and some of the more like image generation systems that are out there. And kind of the concept they dropped, which I thought was really powerful, was that we've gone from a place where everyone can have great ideas, but most people don't have the skills to actually deploy them in a reasonable way, especially to a prototype or a story or something that they can share with others. And now with Midjourney, with interactions with GPT to think about code blocks, with thinking about different ways that you can run analysis on data, so many people with pretty limited knowledge base in areas can now go to the second or third level. And in doing that, one person, this is so powerful in startup world, right? So one person can think about, how do you prototype things? How do you show a like live app to your potential investors instead of showing them storyboards or a Figma, which everyone knows is just a Figma board, right, that you've made into a website, but actually showing them a native app that you deployed on your own shows scrappiness, allows them to have the experience, et cetera. So I think the journey of everyone from complete novice to, we'll go with like next level novice, I don't know. It's a dangerous space, right? We're giving a bunch of people tools to work with there. But I think so much power to be unlocked in that. Then I actually wanted to go back to your first point as well, because I think when you were talking about the trip report, there's a woman named Claire Vo, who is the CPO at a company called Color in Austin. And Claire was recently talking about one of the challenges of communicating with her team. The team always wants to know what's happening in executive conversations. How do you spend your time? How do we think about building strategy? All those sorts of things. And she took her notes from the week and kind of everything she had worked through, fed them into AI, had AI produce a podcast for her, and then shared the podcast out with her team as a thing they could consume when they had time to listen to. Obviously fact-checked and things like that along the way. I thought that was such a powerful combination of summarization, creative generation, and then thinking about how to solve a very real problem in the business, which is how do I help my team have context for what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think just to add to it, and I'll apply it to something is going on at Workday as a concept stage right now. I think we've basically taken the ability to be sort of I'm going to say like an entry-level domain expert in some domain, and we've made that very cheap to get started. So for example, HR, Workday we provide HR and financial software, and there's definitely elements of it where you're kind of like, can I just ping my HR buddy and have them help me with this? And some of that's on us. We just got to fix the experience. Don't get me started on that. But there's also parts of it that just working with people is hard. It is complex to change someone's compensation, and it's a very high stakes interaction, and you want to get it right, and you've got to get it on the right payroll date, and yada, yada, yada. It'd be nice to be able to just call up someone from HR. It's a pretty trivial thing for them. That's a type of thing that I wonder, could an entry-level kind of HR person who's well-read on your policies, aka you fed them your entire confluence, your entire knowledge base, be able to get you like a pretty fast, quick, cheap answer. I think we're seeing the same for entry-level legal questions. I think we're seeing the same for entry-level summarization of an executive who works in a domain. It's just amazing what the base model gives you, and then I think we're just starting to see what it means to do that second shot of training on a smaller corpus in a domain. The part that I'm most excited about is I don't really think anyone has it figured out yet. Like probably all four of us are on the stage sitting here thinking, but just because we've basically taken human reasoning and have made it so cheap to do some baseline human reasoning, I mean, how could that not change fundamentally everything? And so, the game's afoot right now to go figure it out. It's a bit of a gold rush vibe, but hopefully mostly an exciting one where there's just a lot of opportunity. But I am a firm believer that execution is going to matter in this one too, right? We've all played with ChatGPT. I can add a chat bar in the Workday app, right? An engineer could add that in a day because you're just going to call their backend and just like surface the text. But I think the execution really does start to matter when you get in the flow of transaction and everything else. So I think for anyone thinking about playing in this space, what I'd say is build the demo, but then really get into it. I mean, like freaking get into it with your engineering teams. Like, does this actually work? Is the quality actually good enough? Does it actually know how to do what we're asking it to do for our business? Because I think we're seeing a lot of very cool demos right now, but not a lot of stuff that's actually going to work. And so that's where I'd focus my attention.
Let's take a question or two from the audience. I think these mics are on, is that right? Does anyone have a question for the panel? Yeah. Come on up. Thank you.
Just talk? All right. Hi there, I'm John Emerson, product consultant. Thanks for your everyone's comments today. It's really exciting. And we all knew that someone would talk about AI at some level. And I'm going to follow on your question, Katie. I'm wondering for each of you, or whoever wants to answer, that notion of what techniques are you using to train or make AI work better for a specific product use case? Because I think it's like the big question everyone's asking now is, how do I train it for what I want to do now? And just curious, this is a whole bunch of product people who I bet you would have 50 good answers here. So that's my question.
Depends a lot on the use case, of course. So I think you can get a surprisingly far amount of the way with prompt tuning, depending on what you're aspiring to do. And so for folks who aren't as familiar, prompt tuning is basically instructing the model to follow your instructions. So basically saying something like, let's use the trip report example. So you would say something like, AI, imagine that you are an accomplished executive assistant who is very good at creating succinct and entertaining descriptions of meetings and also finding themes across meetings to surface to your team. Please think about how a normal podcaster would create this script and give me a script. And so that's just like a very basic example. You can also do things like give it examples of, for example, here are meeting notes from this meeting, and here's a really great way to describe it. And so especially for folks who want to do what Chandler mentioned, which is great, which is like prototype something, not going to work perfectly, but gives you enough of the sense. Just doing something like that, honestly, can be enough to get the idea across. Then, of course, you get into more complicated things. So, for example, if you, let's say you want to do something in healthcare, and some of the, medical verticalized models, for whatever reason, are not good enough or specific enough to your use case, you can do things like fine-tuning a model. That takes more resources, that takes a lot of data, and so always, the original like garbage in, garbage out matters a lot here. So if you have really good examples, your model is going to be stronger than if not. There are also kind of newish things like LoRa tuning, and there's all sorts of these things. I would say, but really figuring out like what do I need it to produce, and then how do I match it to that use case is probably the special sauce.
One other thing we've been thinking about a lot at Guild is how do we find the right use cases to apply AI to? The reality is generative AI is actually bad at a ton of stuff. And so the question is, in this noisy environment, how do I find signal? And one of the ways we've been trying to find signal is looking at all the things that would have been on our data science backlog from many years and saying, which of these did we walk away from because they were too expensive, because they were too unique, because they were too niche, whatever it is. Because those give you a great entree, right? Because what we've essentially done is let's assume the data quality and results we can get are 90% as good as if we built a custom data science model using modern LLMs. But the cost of doing that went from 100 to 1. So now some of these things I might have thrown out, for instance, at Guild, how might we teach our coaches who work with prospective students every day which school they should go to and which program they should go to and why, which used to be a thing that was too hard to think about how to personalize across a very sparse data set. We've actually been able to both train essentially a like human-in-the-loop AI that works with our coaches and the learners at the same time to find the right thing, which is super cool in terms of an interaction. And we're able to then feed that data back into a bunch of our other systems and come back with the AI is really good at printing rationale for why it made recommendations, which was always a very hard thing to do with our custom data science models. So finding ways that are like use cases that you knew about, like you're not inventing new shit. You knew the problem. You just didn't have a good solution to the problem. And so this is a new set of technology that unlocks some new tools to solve it.
That reminded me of something else, which is, I'm sure in your example, it's not that the AI is like actually doing that job now of like, oh, we now no longer have advisors. We just, give them whatever the AI model does. And what that makes me think of is a lot of times when you use these different techniques, or I should say all the time when you use these different techniques, they don't work perfectly. And so sometimes there's this temptation to say, hey, we're getting, 90% quality with prompt tuning, but like the secret here to making my product work is that I do something more complex with so much more data so that we get to 99.9%. Like, you could do that, and maybe that would work, maybe it wouldn't. But I think right now, especially in like our current era, it is more about AI as the thought partner, the input to the advisor to see like, oh, I buy that rationale, or like, actually in 10% of the cases, I don't really buy that rationale. And thinking about how you design your product to compensate for the fact that the AI is not perfect, I would spend a lot of time on that part of it, and thinking about it as a tool versus as an answer.
The other cool part of that is when you have a human in the loop there, you get not just the quantitative or inferred feedback of what the behavior was on the other side, but our coaches are able to give qualitative feedback on the recommendations. And so our learning velocity, especially because generative AI can handle for words, right? Natural language in a different way. So instead of trying to make this out of ones and zeros, Guild's not huge. We have, call it 10,000 users on our website every day. And so like trying to do a lot of this through traditional quantitative techniques would be impossible. But now we can sit there and say, not only can we produce a recommendation that is generative in a space that we were hitting limits because the human brain couldn't go broader, so we can unlock that problem, but then we also give ourselves a data set that builds and builds and builds and puts us in a place where if we don't have enough data, other people surely don't that are trying to do it. And we now have all this like rich qualitative feedback that we're getting. on are we showing things that matter?
Okay, thanks. First of all, I appreciate this. This is all very informative already. I wanted to ask a follow-up to Kelly and Chandler, actually. Kelly, you mentioned if you had 2 years, you don't think spending it doing an MA to build your career would be the best thing. So I was just curious what would be the best thing to spend your 2 years. And I also wanted to invite Chandler to share his spicy opinions on MAs.
Yes.
I don't know if I will.
Nice.
I was thinking of asking that too. So to clarify, and I may have misspoke, but if it's purely like how do I accelerate my product management career as much as humanly possible in 2 years, I think the MBA could be helpful, but may not. Like there's probably an entire menu of options to do that, and I do think that you'd have to make the MBA like purely, it's a general business degree, right? So even if it has an entrepreneurship focus or a product management focus, it's not all about that. You're learning finance and accounting and all sorts of other things. So, but I would say this is going to be like kind of basic advice, but finding those roles where you really grow make a huge difference. Like that's certainly when I've grown the most is when you take on something where you're a little nervous because you're not actually sure if you're going to be able to do this. And that paired, frankly, with a manager or company that believes in you and has a growth mindset, I think is really important. I wouldn't just blanket say, hey, like take the hardest job you can find and like cross your fingers that it's going to work out really well. I think if you're paired with someone, and I'm thinking of a manager, but it could be just an entire company culture or a peer or something like that, who is really excited about your potential and is willing to give you more and more, like that is the best way to grow in a purely like career sense. A lot of other reasons to get an MBA, but yeah, that's my quick take.
You mentioned growth mindset. As a hiring manager, I was always looking for people who had that and who recognized, here's an area where I need to build up. So I would think about where can I be a better PM? I think one place to hunt is around validation skills, interviewing well, drawing conclusions from interviews, parsing through inputs and data. That is super important. And a lot of PMs spend most of their time cranking in Jira and stories and working with it. They're engineering facing 95% of the time. I think a differentiator is the outbound stuff, the market-facing stuff, the customer-facing stuff. Can you demonstrate that? If you haven't been able to do a lot of that, there are courses like Teresa Torres has this online course called Customer. It's about customer discovery. It's all remote.
Great book too.
It's not that expensive. There are options like that. So that's my general advice. If you don't want to invest in a general purpose MBA, which tends to pay off over 20 years rather than 2, very targeted training opportunities can help.
And start a company. You'll learn the most from starting a company, even if it's just on the side. Yeah.
20 seconds of spice.
Hot take.
I'm not answering the spice question. I can't wear this shirt on stage and answer that question. We can talk about it after when we're not being recorded.
I don't believe in education.
But I wanted to add on to the growth question. So I think one of the questions early in PM careers is always, how do I get reps? How do I learn the fastest I can? One of the tactics I've loved that I've watched a number of PMs use is if your company has product reviews or something like that, those docs are distributed in advance. You get an opportunity to walk into a room, watch a PM defend in front of a bunch of smart executives the decisions they're making and why, what the stories is, what are the facts, those sorts of things. Pre-work it all on your own. Figure out if you were in that PM seat, what would you do? How would you present the case? And then you get to watch live as the scenario plays out. I used this technique early in my career, and I think I went from having about 3 or 4 product briefs a year, call it, in the early days that I got to think about, to about 150. And so if you think about the compounding power of going from, call it even 3 to 100, of the number of reps you get. It's like taking batting practice if you're going to play baseball. And so finding the paths to getting faster reps and learning more, it takes some time, right? That was probably like 5 hours a week, which was mostly at night that I was doing that work. But I learned so much in the 2 years when I was doing it, which then blasted me through a couple of the next stages professionally.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, like as much exposure as you can get to other PMs who are great at their craft, I feel like that has been the single most personal trajectory changing thing for me, was actually just observing other people who are like, dang, I like how that person thinks. Like, what are they how are they doing that? They're in the room and I'm watching them defend it, but I want to see the 50 things they did before they got in that room and just ask them, can I shadow you? Can I help? Can I take notes? Like, you can be in the room with folks doing these things. You need a great mentor and sponsor when you're ready to do the big career arc. You definitely need the great manager and sponsor by the time you're going to try and go up into management or senior IC track. But before that, some people they focus it all up on their manager. Like, this manager's not coaching me. They're not giving me feedback. And I'm like, great idea. Don't make it their problem. Make it your own problem. Just go fix it for yourself, Like, yes, we all want to feel supported and coached, but also look around you, right? Look at what your company's doing. Go where the activity is. I think it's been like the single most important thing for me, because then instead of having my 5 examples of things I've shipped, I've got like the 50 examples riding cockpit with everybody else, and have just learned a lot through it from craft, because I do think PM is a craft discipline at the end of the day.
Where's that mic? Oh.
Hello, my name is Alice Tolpnik. I'm engineering leader and founder of a company in AI industry, helping product and engineering leaders better plan software projects. Question I have for you, kind of related to kind of how to become a better PM and AI, is how do you think your role going to change as we kind of adopt AI more and more? What skills PMs are going to need that are different from today? And how can we help people just entering the industry to get these skills without doing the work that AI is going to replace, like the tedious kind of junior kind of work that many junior people are doing today?
All right, I've got a hot take on this one. I think crisp communication is never going to go out of style. A lot of the first production of something, probably human augmented and reviewed. But if you think about even the people who are being very successful with the early versions of the LLMs, you talked a little bit about prompt engineering and prompt refinement, right? Like a huge amount of what can make these things effective is clearly communicating what you need, what's your intent, what are the parameters, where do you want to give leeway on parameters, where do you not want to put leeway on parameters, because getting to a more exact result is going to be really important. And so I kind of actually think the PM role in a lot of ways is actually pretty well suited for this next rise, in the sense of a large part of a PM's job is to communicate well and crisply. And so I think the hope is that a lot of that other work, the more drudgery work, can be automated. And it can be automated without writing code yourself necessarily, which is very cool, but you're still going to need to communicate pretty explicitly and intentionally about what you're looking for to get to the outcome. So, PMs always have to focus on communication, but I think that one's really important. And then the other one is because it's a technology wave, nothing against MBAs, but I think leaning into understanding the technology is a great skill set for PMs to be looking at right now. Not that you have to know how to build an LLM yourself or become an engineer, but like the magic of what this thing can do is going to be locked away under a bunch of little experiments that you're going to want to run with engineering and look at metrics and look at data and look at quality. So I would also be leaning into some of what the tech side is. OpenAI is producing a lot of new kind of middleware abstractions about what's possible here. And so I think leaning into that would be a great thing during this highly disruptive era.
I'll come back to the validation thing too. I still think any good product company is going to need to be surveying what end users need, what the problems are. That's stuff that seems to me difficult to automate. And so PMs are uniquely positioned to play that role.
And on AI specifically, I'd say being really willing to experiment with it. Like, you're going to try it for some things, it doesn't work at all, try it for others. Oh, that saved me a lot of time. And I think the people who just keep pretty low stakes about that, of it doesn't have to be a big time investment, but just start to use it a little bit more, I think they'll appreciate that later, because then you start building a mental model for what's actually helpful and what's not particularly helpful using it.
I have a bummer take on this question, but do we have other questions from the audience that we want to get to before we're done? Let's go over here. I was just going to bum out the room.
You're teasing us all the time. Spicy takes, bumper takes.
Share them later.
We'll get them eventually, right? Stephen Lepke, nice to see you guys again. So outside of AI, because that's obviously a big hype right now, what would you say is your vision for the changing role of a PM just overall the next 3 years, right? The art and science of PM has really changed a lot in the last 10 years. I think it's gotten some clarity. There's also a lot of like kind of choose your own adventure in some ways as far as how different companies kind of think about PM and everything. How do you see that changing over the next, I'd say, 5 years?
I hope, I don't know about C, but I hope that the PM discipline moves away from being product owners as their sole reason for showing up on Scrum teams and spends a little bit more time doing product work. I don't know if anyone saw the Airbnb announcement that they were quote unquote killing product management, which is, they even said wasn't real, right? And that wasn't actually what they said internally. But when I think about where I hope the discipline goes, I think we did a pretty large disservice to the technology builder community when we took product managers out of the seat of listening to our users all the time and thinking about our markets and pulled them back into not great versions of technical program managers or product owners that are deployed with engineering teams. And so my hope there would be that we move people back into the seat of listening to our users more often.
I have a question. Hi.
Oh.
Thank you so much for this wonderful session. My name is Shraddha Acharya, and I have also completed my MBA recently, so I can totally relate with the MBA and non-MBA stuff. My question would be, what are the top 3 skills do you think, according to your experience, a product manager should have? And the follow-up will be like, what advice you can give to the aspiring product manager, because I have been into a product field as a product owner, but I wanted to become a product manager in future.
Wow.
Katie already gave us one.
What's that?
Well, I'll just pick one skill, Scott, and then you want to get the other 2. I've just got one. Curiosity. But kind of with the relentlessness behind it. I think people who are, I think you described growth mindset earlier, Scott, and when I think about the way that the industry has crafted product ownership, again, which is a little bit more about running the team efficiently and writing great JIRAs to be consumed efficiently, it's kind of robbed the notion of what I think makes product most special, which is just being able to be sort of relentlessly curious and empathetic about who you're actually serving. Is it really working for them? I mean, really, like, have you seen them use it? Have you seen their workplace? Is it actually 10 times better? Because it's easy to make something that's like, yeah, this is a little bit better. It's actually pretty easy to make things that are a little bit better because a lot of software is kind of crappy. Very hard to make things that are 10 times better. And to me, like, I've worked in a lot of different industries. I think that's true for most of this panel, right? Payments, HR software, e-commerce, digital learning. I'm not an expert in any of these domains, but I've had an interesting product career in all of them. And the reason is because I'm just really curious, right? And if I had one wish of folks who wanted to have a fulfilling, interesting career, I'd say stay curious, because it turns out when you start digging into almost any industry, it's kind of fascinating. And like, they definitely need software and tooling, most, not all, to be better.
I'll roll on with the trait explanation. So one thing that I've boiled good PMs down to is systems thinkers. It's a complex world we sit in product. You got customers, you got the market, you got competitors, you got constraints, you've got business metrics you're trying to move. It's a big puzzle. And great PMs can connect the moves they make to what's going to happen upstream and downstream of it. So that's a tough thing to learn, I guess. But my meta point is you got to immerse yourself in all the things that surround the product. Don't stop at the product. Don't stop with engineering. You're only going to be successful if all the pieces fit together. The customers have it. It's the right problem. Engineering can build it. You move the right thing with the business. So think in a systems manner.
And I think the easiest maybe question to ask yourself to do that, at least for me, is if this were my company, what would I do? And then some of those answers are sometimes, actually, I would shut down this product line because I don't know how I'm supposed to be selling this because actually no one wants it. Or, I know we've got this pricing structure, but I think if this thing takes off, it's actually going to get us in a really bad spot later because we've already given away like all of the top 10 features, and I don't know how we're going to go from freemium, actually converting people into premium or whatever. I think though, the things that we mentioned, those to me are like second level. I think what you mentioned is like the absolute of like curiosity close to users. Like that's what you have to start with. Otherwise you start thinking about the entire business and then all of a sudden you lose like, oh yeah, does anybody like this? and you don't actually know the answer to that.
I would add on resilience because I think that being a product person is quite difficult actually. And a lot of people look at the position as if it's kind of glamorous, and maybe it is because you're leading the meeting. But in actuality, you're a dumping ground and you're beholden to everyone, and oftentimes you're the face of failure. So I think being resilient in the company as well.
It's interesting that you asked a question about skills and we answered with personality traits. I would actually make an observation that that is probably a representation of PM being a very different discipline in a lot of places. And so the specific skills vary by stage, by company, et cetera. And so what you're hearing all of us do is go to the first principle, which is like, how do these people show up? How do they interact with others? What drives them? More so than the applied skills. I think around curiosity, learning to learn and knowing how you pick up the next thing, the new content area, whatever it is, fits really well in with that and gets a little bit closer to a skill.
Maybe one more?
Yeah, I'm curious about why you think some of these AI projects are getting funded. I have lots of features that my users are asking for. None of them are a chatbot. But that project is instantly greenlit, So I'm curious why it is we see this momentum kind of driven by the technology and how product managers can best manage that situation.
So I'll answer in the larger company context, right? Because Workday is a larger company and I have a larger team. There's a lot of stories about people who miss waves in hindsight, right? A lot of case studies about this company caught the mobile wave and they were brilliant. Airbnb, they caught it and now they're huge. Oh, Microsoft missed the mobile wave. Did you see Windows Phone? Don't even get me started on PlayStation's phone. So I think and this is just going to be me talking about executives, which is boring, but just hold me through for the pull through, okay? Executives see their job as portfolio management. And so when you run a portfolio, your question is, what percentage allocation do I spend on which investments? And it is an inappropriate answer to be an executive in the modern era with 0% allocated in Gen AI. And the number one consumer tool in Gen AI right now is a conversational-based app called ChatGPT. So where that leads us is every executive running a large enough team in a company right now is going to have some conversational investment. Your point, here's the pull through, doesn't make sense in most places. What are you going to, HR chatting to a chatbot? You got to fill out a lot of details. That's going to be very tedious going back and forth, right? And so I think the why does that always get greenlit? Sorry, boring reason. It's going to get greenlit. What can you do about it? How might you get on that team and then hijack that investment and then talk to some real users and understand the technology enough and say, you know what, this chatbot thing, we could have a conversation with it, or maybe it could help us navigate users around the product, automatically pre-fill out forms on their behalf and direct their attention to where they should check the results. So that's just a little bit of executive hijacking there, which is a key skill if anyone wants to grow in their career. But I mean, it is frustrating, and I think the good news is if your company's in a place where you can invest in it and you'd like to grow in that for your career, how might you get more involved and then do the real product work to find something that actually matters and go ship that.
That was a really good answer. If to add to that, every Q2 board meeting in a private company in America had generative AI on their agenda last quarter. Just like the couple quarters prior to that, there was a conversation about what's going to happen when there's no more money, right? Boards, executives, et cetera, ride waves. They deal in the realities of the market around them. And if you don't have something coming back in Q3 that talks about what you're doing about it and how you're thinking about this, you're going to get fired. And so the real answer here is that everyone has to have something in the space. And I think Katie's build was a great one of what to do about it, right? One of the ways we've thought about it is very similar. How do we say, yes, we hear you, right? There's opportunity in the generative space. Here's the type of things it does well. But then how do we bring that back into use cases that matter, use cases we understand, and things that will actually be impactful for our users?
We're going to end it there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Scott, Kelly, Katie, Chandler. Thank you to Scotty and Ann, Product Track Chairs for Denver Startup Week. Enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.